Recording in progress.
So, welcome to Krishnacore Chronicles, number 22, with J. Curtis Strickland. How are you doing? You okay?
Outstanding, sir. How are you today?
I'm not too bad. Now, we sort of discussed this a little bit before kind of pressing record and stuff like that. But usually, I do kind of loads of research about an interviewee and got a lot like a lineup of questions and all this. But we only kind of got round to organising this kind of yesterday, and
Hmm.
we were going to have Mark Langston join us as well, but Mark couldn't make it because of the time difference. So he's in Australia. So a big shout out to him. So could you first of all kind of just introduce yourself? Who are you? And what are you up to? And what you're doing, etc., etc.
Yeah, so name's J. Curtis Strickland. As far as Krishna consciousness, I go by the spiritual name Jñanagamya Dāsa. I host a show called the TNF Podcast. We started in 2020, late 2020. Been going on since then. Really kind of got into the band member interviews in about 2021. Started as kind of like a political reactionary channel, but kind of shifted gears from that and just wanted to concentrate on interviews with all sorts of people in music, arts. Have had many people from the hardcore scene on there, many actors, comedians, a few directors, producers. I also run the Hell's Heart merch company, which we do like hardcore themed shirts and also movie themed t-shirts. And I have a imprint of that called 10th Canto,
Hmm.
which does Hare Krishna shirts kind of in the theme of punk rock and hardcore bands, like mock t-shirts. Like as you can see, this is a Misfits one right here. Also a actor. I hesitate calling myself an actor because I don't get to do it as much as I used to, and I haven't really been in too many things of note, but I'm trying to change that. I've been trying to redirect into a vocal acting career. I want to do cartoons and voiceover work and video games and things like that. And doing the podcast has been excellent for that because it really kind of helps me to hone and find my voice and is just great practice. Served as a brahmachari for 2 years. Prior to that, served in the military. I directed a music video for a band called Violent Life, Violent Death, who are really good friends of mine. And actually, the bass player of the band, Justin Campbell, is the artist who helps me with Hell's Heart and 10th Canto. I have no visual artistry skills whatsoever. And so he's a really good collaborator for that. And yeah, just been going to hardcore shows since I was about 16 or 17 years old and kind of found Hare Krishna through 108 Shelter, Cro-Mags, as do kind of most people within that scene. Just loving life, man. Just doing the thing and yeah, it's real privilege to be here.
Great. Um, Could you kind of let's go back to, you're kind of becoming a devotee or really getting to know the Krishnas. Can you remember the first time you ever, that first moment when you met a Hare Krishna, when you first came across Krishna consciousness?
Well, I was familiar with it, like I said, through the music, but had never encountered a devotee in the flesh until I was in Los Angeles back when the devotees could distribute books in the airport.
Yeah.
And that was in, I want to say, April or May of 2000. And a really awesome devotee, Brigapati Das from New Dwarka Temple in Los Angeles, sold me one of Prabhupada's books. And it was called Journey of Self Discovery. It's a compilation of Prabhupada interviews and was just very taken in by the artwork. And initially, one of my godbrothers, he kind of made fun of me for this for a while. I thought Krishna was a girl. I was like, who's the girl on the cover of this book, you know? And he was like, oh no, that's a boy, that's Krishna. And I was like, oh, and I felt so embarrassed about that. But initially when I got the book, I never actually dived deep into it. I started reading it and I got to the part when Prabhupada starts talking about regulative principles. It's like no meat, fish, or eggs, no gambling, no intoxication, no illicit sex. And I was like, nah. I was like, sorry. And I closed the book and I just never picked it up again until about 10 years later. Was doing political protesting and kind of got disenfranchised with that, and knew that there was something better out there and there was something higher that wasn't on a material plane. And so I was like frantically searching for this book because I was like, somehow intrinsically I knew that that book would have the answers. And lo and behold, I read it and it just made sense to me. And I just started into my Krishna consciousness path soon after that.
That's just amazing. I mean, what was it specifically about Krishna consciousness? Is there? I read Victor Kara's book, the Hardcore and Train Wrecks, and I'm a bit of a geek really. I'm a bit like Vic. I think he's a bit of a geek,
Mhm.
and I think he liked the fact that everything was there. Yeah, when you're reading about this stuff, there it's kind of all encompassing,
Sure.
and it's talking about cosmology and it's talking about kind of great spiritual stories as well, which I always that kind of sit within, excuse me, this idea that we are not the body. Obviously, is there anything in particular that kind of drew you to this? Well, why not? Why not Catholicism? Why not Sikhism? Why not something else?
I had a brief flirtation with Christianity when I was in high school. It was interesting because whenever I moved to North Carolina by way of Montana, I got asked by my class. They said, "Do you go to any church? Do you believe in God?" And I was like, "No, I'm an atheist." And that was like that sent them all aghast. They were like, and so I kind of felt out of place. And it's not that I necessarily want to be accepted, but I don't want to be maligned at the same time.
Hmm.
So there was a real pretty girl that sat in front of me in my English class, and she was just talking about the church she went to. And I was like, I'm going to show up at that church. And it's funny because she ended up leaving the church and I stuck around and really just I also got into Christian hardcore, like Solid State and Tooth and Nail
Yeah.
Records, was really into a lot of the bands on there, still am. But started going to a church where the punk rock and hardcore kids were not really too accepted. They were initially, and then all these people kind of came forth and were like, I had this vision that these kids were going to this show and there was this machine that was there and they were walking up to this machine and it was gouging and boring their eye sockets out. And I'm like, don't be ridiculous. It's like, clearly you've never been to a show and you have no understanding of what you're talking about. And so I left that church. And it's interesting, after I had the encounter with the devotee in the airport, Brigupati, and I got the book, I ended up flying over to Japan to serve over there. And it was the first time I felt like I was disconnected from God. And then,
Okay.
a period ensued, like I'd mentioned, about a decade where I had no guidance or spiritual trajectory. I just had no passion for it. I had no knowledge of it. And ironically, the thing that really off put me were the four regulative principles, were where I started to kind of align with Krishna consciousness, in that I became a vegetarian when I was in college. Uh, and I was, I mean, I'm a scumbag, like I definitely, sowed my wild oats here and there. And gambling was never really a problem for me, but my biggest thing was intoxicants and trying to get and stay clean and sober. And so when I saw all the tenets and the principles of Krishna consciousness, that's what Prabhupada was touting in order to make spiritual advancement, I was like, oh, well, then this sounds like a perfect fit for me, And I just kind of read on, and like the philosophy was very moving to me, and it was kind of more in alignment with what I started to believe about the world. Prabhupada was vehemently against communism, and while I was sort of an ardent leftist at the time, I didn't see any sort of goals other than chaos and anarchy. And so whenever Prabhupada spoke out on that, I was like, oh, well, now this is even making more sense to me. And so I really felt like all the answers were there, like you said with Kishore. Like it, it was just like I was just downloading all this information, and I was like, oh wow, oh okay, and it just really resonated with me, and I really loved it for that.
What was it? What was it? You met the devotees in 2000.
Hmm.
What was it 10 years later that took you back? May I ask you, or is it quite personal to think,
No, it well, after I got out of the military very unceremoniously, and I ended up going to a liberal arts college studying acting, which I'd been in the performance field since I was about 7 years old, and just really kind of wanted to make a career out of it. And again, my intoxication got in the way of me having a fruitful education. I was a horrible drunk at the time, and it only just exponentially increased as the years kind of went on. Just worked a bunch of just dead end, terrible, just useless Mickey Mouse jobs. And I played in a band, actually a hardcore band, in about 2004 to 2007. And the singer was actually a devotee. So I was reconnected again through that way. And I was always curious about it. Like he would be chanting japa and reading and things like that. And I was always intrigued by it because I was like, oh, yeah, I got a book from the devotees when I was in LA, and was like, oh, that's cool. What book is it? And I was like, oh, so and so. And, he never tried to press it on me or anything, never tried to really impose it. But I was always kind of curious about it. Fast forward a few years, and my grandmother passes away, and I was not in a good headspace at the time, and I've dealt with depression and mental issues most of my life. It's been kind of marred by that. And we were getting ready to play a show in Raleigh, North Carolina, and he was like, "Hey, do you want to stop by the temple with me?" And I was like, "Sure," and like we went in there. The deities weren't out. They weren't on display whenever we went to the temple. It was in Hillsborough, Nuka in Hillsborough, North Carolina. And but I just remember this sense of peace, this sense of pacification coming over me, and I didn't feel the distress or the anxiety that had kind of compounded on me. And we ended up playing this really amazing show, and I'll never forget that, just because I was like, there's so much power here, and as you and I know, Shakti energy, it just really just felt amazing. And then I again kind of worked some dead end jobs and was doing the political protests, the Occupy protests. And once I found that book, I called him up and was just like asking him all these questions. So he was almost initially like a guru to me. He still is. I still thank him for connecting me with Krishna consciousness. And I read John Joseph's book, and I read, the Bhagavad Gita, and I read all these other like ancillary texts. And yeah, just started going to the temple in like 20, beginning of 2012. And yeah, served as a brahmachari for 2 years in Gainesville. Got to go travel all around the world, and it was just amazing.
So that was great. So that's your journey into kind of being initiated. Yeah, could you tell me a little bit more about you being a brahmachari? I want to hear more about you. Sort of traveling the world and also kind of which is kind of interesting for me as well. Were you still drinking at the time when you were doing this?
No, when I started practicing, I was all in. Like I didn't, well, I'm trying to think of the last time I touched anything. It would have been at the protests. I think I smoked weed or something like that. But then when you're involved in these political protests, you become a target like instantly. You will be under the scrutiny of the police, intelligence agencies, journalists, all these other people. And I always kind of kept to myself, but everybody wanted to talk to me. Like Ariana Huffington wanted to talk to me, Keith Olbermann wanted to talk to me, and I was like, I'm not talking with anyone. I just don't want any sort of additional exposure, and I don't want to compromise this movement. And you get kind of paranoid and you get kind of scared. And me with my mental issues already, I just don't need that. It's additional trouble that I'd just rather kind of steer clear of. And so I just quit smoking weed and I just didn't do anything. And that in itself brought a whole heap of problems on there because I ended up having to get on mood stabilizers, which have greatly benefited my life. And once I started going to the temple, I just said, "Yeah, I'm all in. I'm chanting 16 rounds a day. I'm not doing anything that I shouldn't be doing according to Prabhupada." And I kind of kept with that for a minute. Well, probably about 5 years, 16 rounds a day. Didn't do anything. Was initiated in Mayapur in 2016. Uh, and kind of kept going along with that. And then again, fell off the horse eventually and got back on, fell off again. And, one thing that I really appreciate about Krishna consciousness is, when they say Bhagavad Gita 2:12, uh, I'm going to butcher the Sanskrit, but in this endeavor, there is no loss or diminution, and a little advancement on this path can protect one from the greatest type of fear. And so that to me was always reassuring and it just made me feel like, hey, you know what, as much of a rascal, and I always love that word, Prabhupada always using it all the time,
Mm.
rascal, as much of a rascal as you can be and how deep into your rascaldom you just get back, just start chanting and just go, and like I know some devotees in this movement, and even specifically within the hardcore scene, like, they fell off. They, as we say, blooped, and then they came back stronger than ever. And so that instilled this sense of confidence in me that, like, don't worry about it type thing.
Yeah, yeah. Did you enjoy being a brahmachari? Was it good?
Oh yeah, back to the brahmachari. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes and no. When I was a brahmachari, it's so stupid. Again, my Maya would be. I'd say probably my biggest Maya illicit sex, even more so than intoxication. But there was a girl there that I really liked, and she would always like bring other dudes back there, like that weren't devotees or anything to the temple. Finally, I just got fed up with it, and I was like, you know what? I'm just gonna, I'm gonna dye everything saffron. I'm just gonna go. And I talked to the temple president, and he was like, you sure about this? And I was like, yeah, I think I want to do it, and he was like, all right, well, if you do it, then you got to do it for 2 years. And I was like, sure. And
Okay.
so I did it. And it's funny because I show up in saffron, and said girl, the minute she saw me in saffron, she was like, what the hell, man? Like that. And I was like, well, you missed the boat there, sweetheart, and so it was it was uh it was great in that I was able to stay focused, but at the same time my mind was still agitated. Like I definitely
Mm,
consider that to be like a false renunciation in my life,
yeah.
because I still want to get married, I still want to have children ideally. I may have missed the boat on that one, but I want a Krishna conscious partner. And so that dichotomy within my mind of being able to give myself fully to Krishna, but also simultaneously wanting to pursue the householder path was just really just conflicting with me. And by the end of the 2 years, I was like, I'm done, but really kind of appreciated the time that I was able to just really strengthen my spiritual practices. Like I lived in Gainesville, Florida, in the temple there, and got to cook and really relished that service. You know, Having been in the military, it was not difficult for me to wake up at, early in the morning. The difference being that when I had to wake up in the military, they were throwing a trash can down the hall. And it was a delight to be able to be awoken by mridungas and kartals and things like that. So, loved it and got to go to Poland, Belgium, Canada, Germany. Um, I mean, I was technically, I wasn't like a saffron brahmachari, but like I said, I got to go to India, Mayapur, Vrindavan, and yeah, it was wonderful. It was one of the best experiences I've ever had in my life. Really peaceful, really just really, I love it. I'd even consider, once I'm significantly older and if this whole materialistic grihasta householder thing doesn't work for me, maybe going back into that path someday.
That's great. So what took you out of the path? Well, what took you away from being a brahmachari?
Just wanted to get married and just, again, I didn't really feel right being a brahmachari,
Mm,
just felt like there was almost like a conflict of interests within my mind. Just felt that I would eventually would eventually fall down, And so I said, I feel like I need some sort of spiritual partner in order to kind of help me facilitate that desire and in order to, make advancement on that path. I reached out to some astrologers and, people within temples to do some pairings. And it's always kind of been a nightmare. It's always kind of been like a fiasco, but still kind of holding on, waiting for that. Um, Truthfully, I don't think I was materially ready. I don't think I was spiritually mature enough. I don't think I got knocked down as many times as to be able to kind of appreciate that would be a good trajectory for me.
yeah.
So yeah,
You've touched upon your sobriety, um, and you being a horrible drunk. Um, you know, so as we discussed just before, kind of coming on here, um, I was exactly the same, and I've been sober now for 16 years. It'll be 16 years in August.
congratulations.
What is it? Thanks. And you're 2.5. Um, could you take us through that? Talk to us about, say, your sobriety and about you being a horrible drunk, and the kind of depths that this stuff can take us, really, and then how kind of your spiritual journey kind of did that really inform? No doubt it informed your sobriety. and how those two were put together. So it's a really long question.
No, no. Sure. Well, like I had mentioned, when I was in college, I just became a exceedingly heavy drinker. I flunked out of college. I've just destroyed so many relationships, burnt so many bridges because I was just a lush. I just really had a problem with it. And I can't just drink one beer. I can't just drink one Jack and Coke. I just got to go until the bottle's gone or until the 12 pack's gone or whatever. And, you know, I will say that in hindsight, I ended up getting to appreciate marijuana more. I didn't really like the feeling of being drunk, and I did like the feeling of being high, but I didn't feel like my life was going anywhere. I really am beaten down when I'm on substances, and, tried things like AA. And while I don't feel like AA worked for me, their core belief is connecting with a higher power. That's one of the steps within the 12-step program. And so, I grew up and I'm at present, I'm in the Southern United States in North Carolina, and Christianity reigns supreme here. Like, you don't really get to see any other faiths here. You do, but you kind of have to travel for it. Like, I'm a little bit north of Charlotte, but the majority of kind of like alternative religions are in Charlotte, like, Judaism, Islam. They have a Hindu center there. It's not like a Vaishnav center. Like, it's kind of universally Hindu, I guess you could say. There's no one real focus on anything. And so would, I felt like that was missing in my life, and I didn't know how to get connected beyond that. And it's interesting because with AA, they really drill it into your head. They're like, you're an alcoholic, you're an addict. And I'm like, well, if you keep reinforcing that within somebody's mind, like, you would go to these meetings and they would be like, I'm not going to take a drink today. I'm not going to, smoke today. I'm not going to do anything like that. And it's just constantly like replaying in your head because that's all you hear about. You're just like,
Yeah,
wow, this is the preeminent focus of this group. And so it's just rattling around in your mind every day. And I just didn't like that about it. And I ended up relapsing in AA.
okay.
And that really just led me down a dangerous path. I was not a good time for me, not a good time for me. And I would say probably shortly after that, like a few years, was when I really got into Krishna consciousness. But, in the interim, you know, really heavy narcotics, really heavy street drugs. Again, definitely not a good place in my life. And again, it wasn't until I became connected with the devotees that I had a stint of sobriety that lasted me almost 10 years. And,
Okay.
you know, I attribute that, like, John Joseph made a post this morning about rising early and chanting and reading and staying physically fit. And I do believe that that is the best solution to sobriety, cleanliness, and just overall happiness. And so I did that, and probably, and I was in Hollywood too. So it was really difficult to do there. And had I been in my 20s, I went to Hollywood when I was about 30. But had I been in my 20s, I would have been completely enveloped in that culture because it's it's just everything there is revolves around partying and, you know, live fast, die young type mentality. And most of your connections kind of come through rooftop parties where you'll go and, hobnob it up with producers and people that are in the acting and entertainment industry. And thankfully, I was kind of beyond that at that time. I was sober for a long time. And so I just had no desire to go be involved in any of those things, thankfully. And fast forward a few years after that, I was hit by a car and I ended up
Okay.
shattering my L5 S1 vertebra. I broke a bunch of my ribs. My lung collapsed. I got blood and fluid in it. And, it was just completely devastating to me at the time. And I had a pretty long road to recovery. I'm still in pain every day. And I don't want to say I'm completely out of the fire because I definitely think about it from time to time, but
Yeah.
I really thought about it then and just fell again into heavy narcotics. And, that was a way to kind of alleviate my pain, that was my perceived way of approaching that. And it really, like, really sent me in a tailspin, 2.5 years ago. And it wasn't until I ended up just going to the temple in Los Angeles, New Dwarka again. So, there's that connection that was like the beginning of my, you know, I would say probably the beginning of my journey. I didn't take to it initially, but, you know, again, being able to be reconnected was in New Dwarka and, just fell before the deities and was just, uh, I mean, I hadn't cried in years, and just was just full of remorse and just anguish and just had to let that out and just get it out of there and just started chanting again. And you know I was in association of some bad individuals. And when I say bad, I don't mean anybody that was doing narcotics, but I was training to do yoga out there. Like, I wanted to be a yoga instructor, still do, but I got connected with
Yeah.
a better group this time, thankfully. But, Mayavads, impersonalists, people that don't believe in God. I was actually kind of trying to avoid the devotees because I didn't feel like I was living my life right, um, soliciting prostitutes. I spent a lot of money on that, again, the narcotics. And once I started chanting, Krishna was like, go. He was like, get away, get far away from these people. They don't have your best intentions in mind. They ended up ripping me off of about close to 8 grand and lost a bunch of money because I moved out of my apartment. I had to break my lease. And it was a very costly experience. And I wish I could say that I regret that. But at the same time, it did reconnect me with Krishna.
Yeah.
And so for that, I guess you could say I'm grateful for it. And I'd also like to thank the creators of the game Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom because that kept me sober. Like, that kept me just locked in my house. Like, I was detoxing for a year off of methamphetamine. And I put in about 320 hours to that. And but it helped me, like it's something that, when you view it from a certain lens,
Mm.
like, you know, when you say you dovetail things, like we believe in utilizing things in Christian service. Well, video games can be an addiction. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Like, I only
Yeah.
try to play like maybe an hour every day. And some days I don't even play, like it's not as significant to me at this point in time. But for that purpose, it saved my life. I do believe that, And so, but yeah, just back on the horse, 2.5 years. And I just try to keep going, and I can only attribute my continued limited success to, chanting the Maha Mantra.
Yeah. That is an incredible journey. Um, and there's a couple of things you've said there. there is that sense of, whether you can regret something or not, whether you can, look back on something and say, I wish it had been different. But in a way, we needed to go on that journey to get that, to really hit that rock bottom. And what happened to me was, it was, I was kind of drinking. It was the 14th of August 2009, and I'd already been in rehab, and I'd gone through the first three steps, and so it was all about that handing your life over to the higher power and blah blah, and about a kind of, in the Christmas before that, in a very short part of being sober, I found an old Bhagavad Gita. Actually, it's that one there that an old girlfriend had bought me, when I was doing my undergrad degree in the kind of early 90s. And I thought to myself, I'm gonna read this thing. I'm gonna just pull it apart. I've got a master's, I've got a PhD. I can pull this thing apart. And I read it and thought, wow, this is just incredible. And there was a few bits and pieces in there that, Prabhupada's thoughts about women and stuff that I felt quite problematic about. But overall,
I
just sort of,
completely disagree with him, though.
you know, you know, yeah, and it was kind of like, and I spoke to a devotee about those thoughts, later on, and yeah, I just read this book and just thought, oh my God, this is just absolutely, just incredible. And so that was it, and then just put it to one side, and just carried on. And then kind of on this Friday was kind of drinking, and um and then kind of really said, and someone, you're right. No, I'm all right, thank you. And then um and then said out loud on this Friday, look, God, you're a complete cunt. I said, you're a cunt. You're a fucking arsehole. I said, you're a wanker. I said, if you think you can you can do my life better than me, then you fucking take it. I said, I'm just called him all the names under the sun. And I felt this kind of lift and this kind of complete moment of clarity, and I never drank again. And in fact, I did drink again because, the doctors had given me some Librium, which I hadn't started yet. Because at the time, I couldn't come off of alcohol safely. It would have killed
Mm.
me, and I'm lucky to be alive. And so I went back home, and I was staying with my parents at the time, and my mum lent me £5. I can't believe why she gave me money, and I went and bought some low alcohol like Stella lager, 6 cans of them for £5. And then on the Friday night, I drank three of them just to get me through the night. And then in the morning, I woke up and drank the next three. And the last gulp of my Stella, I took the first Librium, and that was it. And I haven't even thought about it. And my wife, who's just been clearing up the room now because she's come back from work, um, she drinks in the house, and I pour her wine, and I pour her beer, and we buy alcohol, and we go into pubs, and I buy alcohol at the bar, and I've never ever even thought about drinking. It's anathema to me. It's very strange. And with our local doctors, um, they're all Christians in the surgery. But there's no reason for us to, we didn't go there because we're Christians, and people don't go there. But it's just that the doctors are all Christians. And my wife once said to our doctor, who gave me the Librium, said to him, disbelieving in God stuff is rubbish. I mean, she said, you can't believe in miracles, surely. And he said, well, Mike is a miracle, you know, and we're both miracles, aren't we? And it
Mm.
kind of stopped her in her tracks. And it's fascinating, this kind of stuff on um, around mental health, and getting sober allowed me then to realize that I've got mental health issues, and now I'm on, I'm on sertraline and etc. etc. And before, because I know that it's about you, it's not about you, but I really liked your thoughts about AA. I did the I know that it's a US based uh, DUI thing about 90 minutes and 90 days. So I know that
Yeah.
it's not a thing in AA officially. It's not a UK thing. Anyway, but anyway, so I did 115 meetings in 90 days and just
Wow.
kept going, kept on going. But I haven't been to a meeting for years, and I got a little bit. I got really fed up because of what you're saying. It was just it got overwhelming about this constant need to kind of go on about it, and about, I don't know if you felt the same about your sobriety. Yeah, it's not your life. Your sobriety is not you, is it? That's
Exactly.
the wrong way to say it, but me being an old drunk is doesn't sum up me as a person.
Right.
That's something
Exactly.
that's there in the past, and it does. Yeah, go on.
Are
Yeah,
Are you familiar with Dharma punks?
yeah, yeah. So I've got the
So
book over. Yeah, yeah.
Noah Levine has a program called Refuge Recovery, and it's a Buddhist program that I started going to
Right.
in LA. This was, I relapsed once, and then I got back on the horse, and I was sober for about a year. And it's much like you said, it's not necessarily going into detail about, well, I passed by a pub or a bar today, and I thought about drinking, but I didn't. Or, my friends were around me hitting the bong, and I thought about it, but I didn't. Like, you can just talk about, oh, today I got up and I cleaned my house, and I really feel like my mind's at ease, and I watched a movie. And I have different, kind of thoughts on Buddhism, and I don't, obviously don't agree with, that path as far as enriching my life spiritually, but I do feel like it was, a better direction for me at the time because, they meditate.
Yeah.
They don't meditate on a god, but they do meditate. And, there's a lot of people there that are vegans or vegetarians, and, a lot of really nice people. Again, I do happen to kind of meet some not so great people sometimes, and I feel like that did affect the experience for me. But at the time, it was a really great program. I felt it was much better than AA. There were some devotees that were involved in it, coincidentally, but you
Right.
know, um, I don't know. Is there a devotee recovery program? I know
I
they
was
they
just going to
sort of do
say, I
some
think there
things, but
is. Yeah, I think there's a
yeah,
Bhakti 12-step program. Yeah.
okay, yeah, yeah. I wish I'd known about that at the time because you know eh, beyond the sobriety part, the spiritual philosophy was kind of rudderless. Like I just didn't feel like there was any cohesion
No,
in
I know.
the belief structure, and it was all like, as we say, hippy dippy. Like
Yeah.
that is so prevalent and predominant in LA. Just like it's all
Mm.
about good feelings, and it's all about, oh, like self love, and like what can I do, like just emotions, and just superficial things that I didn't feel like, and especially after having practiced devotional service, just didn't feel like were helping me out
Mm.
any.
And I suppose that's where something like the four regulative principles comes into its own really, because I know that when I got sober, I mean, I've been a vegetarian for, since the 80s anyway, due to me being an older narco punk. So I was a veggie anyway. And this is the thing now, I'm actually kind of straight edge as well. I'm a straight edge
Sure.
punk because it's a bit like you. I don't take any intoxicants at all. I don't touch drugs. Yeah, I'll keep away from video games and stuff like that. Obviously, don't drink,
See, I still don't. I
Um,
still love video games. But again, sparingly, to where
yeah,
it's like
yeah,
where Prabhupada says sense gratification's like salt. A little in the preparation's fine, but too much will spoil it, And so
yeah,
again, I try to really limit my interaction with it. I if you play, this is an older game at this point, but I just recently got into it, was Alien Isolation. That's a fun game, And
yeah,
so
yeah.
like I don't, if it's keeping me away from drugs and alcohol, that's one step further to strengthening Krishna consciousness to me,
Yeah,
So yeah,
yeah.
I do what I can, but I try to read and I try to, I've been attending Wisdom of the Sages. Um, I try to, yeah, like I try to read every night and chant and do all that stuff. And my life is exponentially better as a result.
It is incredible, isn't it? I,
Yeah.
AA, so AA did teach me some things, and well, it's nice to take away those little snippets of advice. Someone said to me, when you click the kettle on in the morning to make yourself a cup of tea or a cup of coffee, just ask whoever you believe in, your higher power, to keep you sober that day. And I just got into that habit of every morning clicking the kettle on and
Mhm.
saying, I know who I am. And I was chanting a lot of the time, and I kind of don't chant so much now, and I should do. And I still read the Gita a hell of a lot. And of course, from a research as an academic and writing about Krishnacore, I read
Yeah.
a lot of Indian texts. So I still do that. But first thing in the morning is that clicking the kettle on and going, yep, I I am an alcoholic or a recovering alcoholic. I cannot touch alcohol today. All I have to do today is not touch alcohol, and the rest will just kind of sit in place for me. And it
Right.
has, and it's just a wonderful process, isn't it?
Right. Well, and your pitfalls, your Achilles heels, and I think that's so beneficial because when we don't know we have a problem, then
No.
that's a huge detriment. And I had to be told like, "Hey, dude, you acted like a real ass at this party, like you
Yeah.
drinking and I don't. I used to get like really lovey drunk to where I would just, have one night stands and stuff. But like, it came to the point where I was starting fights and like, you know, just going into bars and being confrontational just for the sake of being confrontational. And like, people didn't want to hang out with me. People
No.
didn't want to associate with me after that because, I wasn't fun. It just wasn't like a fun person to be around when I was drinking, And so having a third party, an outside party to be able to tell me, dude, you need to like make some changes. And I say this because I care about you. Like that's huge, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. And it's about being honest with yourself, isn't it? As well.
Hmm.
I mean, you're the only person who's going to be able to change this.
Right.
Um, and you got to get to that kind of rock bottom before you can. For me, it was, yeah, that moment of clarity.
Hmm. Yeah.
Deep
No, I,
stuff,
I,
isn't
I
it?
think
Yeah.
I definitely hit it here recently, and it's like, it's almost Krishna's way of saying, oh, you don't get it? Like you still don't get it? You still don't get it? Well, here, you know? and,
Yeah.
and all my desires were facilitated at the time. Again, have a huge problem with sex desire, and a huge had a huge problem with pornography, and it was to the point where, with the money that I got from getting hit by a car, I was able to like facilitate meeting some of these girls, and like just spending a bunch of money. You want to talk about an addiction? That was me
Mm.
manifesting my addiction to the fullest, and I want to again, it's one of those things where in hindsight you're like, why did I do that? I could have invested that money in so many different things. But if that's what it took
Yeah.
for me to be reconnected, then I'm okay with that.
Yeah. Yeah. And how about your practice now? I've just admitted that I don't chant as much as I should. Um, are you still chanting 16 rounds? Are you still?
I try to, and I'll be completely honest with you. Like, there's been days where I don't hit it, and that's
Yeah.
my own fault. I take responsibility for that. And that's when I did enter my 30s, because I always used to think that nothing was my fault. I was never at fault for any of my actions. I would scapegoat it on whatever circumstance or person or whatever. And as I got older, I learned to take responsibility. This is what being an adult is about.
Yeah. Exactly.
Generally, you're in certain circumstances because of you. Probably about 95% of the time, your actions, your choices. And so when I don't chant 16 rounds, I don't really have an excuse. Like I do. I mean, I had to take like a Mickey Mouse job here recently, but most of my day has just been spent doing, creative projects. I'm very thankful to have a uh, family that was able to help facilitate my living when I was trying to get clean and sober. Uh, but with that and mental duress, wasn't really able to work, at least not anything steady. I mean, the merch company brings in a lot of,
Okay.
sporadic bursts of funds here and there. And I'm really trying to change that in order to make that almost a full-time gig, at least supplementally, to where I can just make some money here and there. But it's like hit or miss. Um, but it's weird because when I go to bed, I like to chant a few rounds before I go to bed. Some people are like, I like to chant all in the morning. And I'm like, I don't always like doing that because when I know that I have rounds to chant, it keeps me focused on Krishna, you
Okay.
know,
Makes sense.
because I
Yeah.
could I could chant 16 rounds during the day and then just be like whatever, and not really focus on any bhakti or sadhana or anything like that. But when I know I have like a handful of rounds that I have to chant before I go to bed, that's the last thing I think about before my head hits the pillow, you
Yeah.
know? I mean, I guess you could read too, but I I find I find that just kind of purifying the atmosphere and keeping everything very sattvic, kind of helps me rest. And so I, just leave like a handful of rounds and then I'll, chant a few in the morning. Sometimes I do 16, sometimes I'll just go all the way. But if I don't, I don't feel bad about it. That's the
No.
change, to where I don't feel guilty because I know that Krishna is not going to hate me. He's not going to leave me. He knows that I here's one thing I will say. Even in the throes of my worst moments, in the worst addiction, I never did forget Krishna. Never. I wasn't subservient to Krishna, but it was like that's once you it's like that, if you know, you know. Like
Yeah.
once you're connected, once you start to go along that path, it's really kind of hard to forget that. I don't know if you feel the same way,
Yeah.
but
Yeah. Yeah. I do.
like you're just like it's always like Willie Nelson. It's you were always
Yeah.
on my mind, like so yeah, I try to make it a steadier practice, and I think that if I don't hit it, I don't feel so bad.
Right. You talk about family. I just want to change the subject a little bit. I was
Sure.
watching one of your kind of you advertising your merch store, etc. on Facebook. And is it true that you come from a middle class family? And what is that? What is that? What is the joke? Because and then someone in the you said, did I say it at the end? You said, did I say that I come from a middle class family? I think it was a friend in the background said asshole or
Well,
something.
if you're no, I put a clip in there from Reservoir Dogs. I mean,
Ah,
if you're
right.
familiar with American politics, you'll know it's our I'm not very popular in Krishna consciousness because of my politics,
Oh.
which again I think is absurd because if you look at have you read Salted Bread?
No, I haven't. No, salted
Oh,
bread. Right.
yeah.
I'll have a
It's a
look.
really hard it's a really hard book to find. I found a physical copy on Amazon, but it cost me a little bit of money. But it's about the devotees that grew up in the Soviet Union.
Ah, it's
And
interesting.
well, it's a heartbreaking, tragic
I
experience
bet.
for them because, you know, when you don't have freedom of religion, when the government controls almost every aspect of your life, I mean, you look at North Korea, you look at, you know, post World War II, pre 1990s Soviet Union, like you did what the state told you to do. And so the devotees, like Indrajuma Swami used to go to Russia and like distribute literature as basically like a spy. He had to be so covert about his actions and these devotees, the Russian devotees are some of the most wonderful people I've ever met in the world.
Right.
They're so dedicated and it does like they almost don't even have to think about it. Like it's mechanical, but in a good way. Like to where they're very they're very rigid, but it just kind of comes naturally to them, and just really like I made some of the best friends when I was in Poland because it's mostly Russian devotees that run the Polish tour and just wonderful, fantastic people. But they didn't get the luxury of practicing because they would get thrown in gulags.
Yeah, that's
The
right.
religion was the religion was the state. The religion was Khrushchev or Brezhnev or whoever was in power at the time, and
Mm,
so they would get thrown in prison. And the only thing that they had to eat in prison was salted bread
yeah.
because they were vegetarians because they were so strict about their sadhana and their practices. They're like, we're not going to eat meat. And so the prisons were like, well, you can have this salted bread because that's all we got for you. And they
Okay.
did not compromise. And man, I can't say if I was put on that position that I'd be able to do that. I don't know that I would. And
No, I don't think
so,
I could.
I mean, I haven't touched meat in quite a long time, but you know, it's one of those like time, place, and circumstance things to where it's like, I don't know how I'm going to react in that situation. I was a voracious meat eater growing up, and you know, I almost consider myself like a meat and potatoes vegetarian. Like some of my favorite restaurants to go to were, like vegan burger joints in LA and stuff.
Mm,
But I digress a little bit in that the American system was really starting to become corrupt and so many people weren't seeing it. So many people weren't seeing it. And I'm like,
mm.
if this election doesn't go a certain way, we're not going to get another election. We're just
Right.
not. They have set it up in such a fashion, they've engineered it in such a way that they're just going to say, well, this is who you're going to get.
Yeah.
And that's how it
Yeah.
works in an authoritarian state. And I did not want that. I mean, that was like a spiritual reawakening that came to me during COVID, which was the most bullshit psyop that this world has ever
Mm,
pulled. And I was like, what is going on here? Like, we're
yeah.
being locked down in our houses. We're
Yeah.
being like, you know, we're being told we can't go into stores or our places of worship. And like, that's when things started to kind of shift for me because I was pretty, you know, I would say pretty far left, like back in the day,
Okay. Yeah.
and just the fact that the messaging was so like, you need to get vaccinated. You need to get, you better do this or you're going to kill people. That's really when I started to ask even more questions. And just the fact that like the left was so concerned with bodily identity. They're so concerned with that. And I thought back to Prabhupada. I was like, Prabhupada, like Krishna consciousness 101 is you are not this body.
Yeah. Yeah.
You are not this body.
Yeah.
This is a huge distraction. And since we're on the subject, it pisses me off when the devotees go into that territory. And like, I understand that people should be loved and accepted, and especially into Krishna consciousness. But devotees who have been around for a while and devotees that understand the philosophy a little bit more than like a neophyte should understand that this is a distraction. Like this is it's low vibrational, it's so immaterial, and everyone that cheerleads for it and champions it, I'm just like, why? Like,
Okay.
why can't you see somebody as Atma? Why can't you see somebody as a spirit soul rather than a gender or a race or a sexuality? Like, why is this so important? Why can't you just meet them on the plane of human existence? And so, um, I kind of went off on a little tangent there, but that was like a little inside joke that I had, and some of my guests have even kind of like said something about it, and I'm just like, don't take anything I say too seriously. Like I sometimes we'll talk about political things on there, and if I disagree with somebody's politics, I'm not going to go in on them like hardcore. Like I
No,
may ask some
no.
questions, and I may like get them to rationalize their position. Like I've had a few, well, not a few, but I had a trans person on my show, and I love that person. They're wonderful. I knew them before they had transitioned, and I think they've been incredible in their path. But I was asking questions like genuinely because I was curious and I wanted to know.
Yeah.
But I'm
Yeah.
not going to condemn anyone for what they believe, just so long as, you know, I'm a laissez-faire type person, like live and let live. Like
Yeah.
let's
Yeah.
just allow people to do what they want. Don't impose any sort of ideologies on us, especially children. Don't try to like force feed your
Mm.
message. Just let people live their lives. And I think
Yeah.
we'll all be able to be copacetic with that. And I think Krishna consciousness will benefit from that, to where we're just distributing prasadam and we're just like speaking about the Vedas and things like that, rather than championing all these ideologies that are almost counterintuitive and like an anathema to like spiritual practices, to bhakti.
Well, that's funny enough, that's how AA has been so successful, isn't it? I know we've been critical of it, but that's what AA does. AA does not talk about anything else
Right,
except for someone who wants to stop drinking. And
right.
that's it. So, you can go along to AA and say, well, you guys should really be going to a yoga class. Well, okay, you go to the yoga class. This is AA. And actually,
Right.
that kind of focus and that laissez-faire kind of focus is 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 what's made it quite either a success for some or not success in some people's eyes.
Yeah,
So I know
absolutely.
what you
And
mean.
I think there's a reason that, we don't talk about political things or religious things at the dinner table. Like let's
Yeah,
find common ground, because those things can tend to be typically divisive. Like I like talking about movies. I will talk about movies all day long.
yeah.
I'd rather talk about movies than political stuff. I'd rather talk about bhakti than political stuff.
Yeah, and social media, of course, is full of political stuff. It's full of people disagreeing because it just gets so bogged down on social media with people just being so contrasting, and just in some ways kind of disagreeing for the sake of bloody disagreeing, because they don't
Right.
agree with the person. For the left isn't agreeing with the one on the right, and the right's not agreeing with the one on the left, and it's become kind of so binary, so contrasting.
My feed is inundated with it, and there will be times
Mm.
where, I mean, again, I stand where I stand on certain positions, but there will be times where I want to chime in and say something. And I really have to reel myself in because I know that it will just be a waste of time. It's just energy and minutes or hours of my life that are just being focused into something that really isn't spiritually beneficial, because you're generally not going to change somebody's mind on the internet,
No, no, not
because
at all.
they've already got that deflector shield of like, I can say whatever I want to without impunity,
Yeah,
and like they end up just generally being angry anyway, even if you're trying to come from a rational place with like logic and facts. Like they're just going to come and cut you down with ad
yeah,
hominems, like it's just so like useless. And so, and again, I'm guilty of it. Like I've been there to where and I just, my knee jerk reaction is to say something, and now I just have to be like, nope, not gonna say anything. But like you said, like with social media, it's so like it's just boom, 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 like Facebook. Facebook is just like, oh
I
my
know.
god. And I don't know if you knew this or not, but like you can actually go over to your friends section and like it will eliminate all the ads and stuff. And I'm like, why didn't I know about this before? And
Oh, I didn't
why
know
is
that.
this the yeah,
Uh,
why is this the default to where I see, whatever uh you know Washington Post or Breitbart says, like I don't, like I want to see pictures of people and their dogs and their cats and things like that.
yeah,
Like all this stuff just doesn't,
yeah,
I don't want to say it doesn't interest me, because I do read and I try to stay informed, but at the same time, like just the biggest nonsense. Like they do it. They're like harvest content in order to like harvest views and all this other stuff. I'm just not about that anymore. Like
no,
I've been there,
no.
but I don't want to go back there.
Right. So it's great. I've really enjoyed this because it's kind of gone from Bhakti to kind of recovery, back to Bhakti, to social media, back to Bhakti. It's constantly going around in a circle, but we've
Yeah,
kind of been chatting for an hour. Um,
sure.
I just really want to thank you for
I want to
chatting.
thank you,
Really,
sir.
it's been fantastic. It's been really good.
Yeah,
Thank you.
and
Yeah,
I appreciate you extending the offer, because I like talking about bhakti and I don't get to do it very often. I do appreciate having the devotees on the show, because there's that common ground there. And
yeah.
hopefully you'll be a guest on my show someday. Like you've
We'd
had a
love
really
to.
interesting story and trajectory, so maybe we'll set something up here in the future. And
We'd love to. Yeah,
yeah, like I said, been a really great time. And again, thanks for having me, sir.
great. See you later.
Arrivo.